Target the risk posture that allow your organization to excel. Give yourself and your team permission to risk. Align incentives with the outcomes you're seeking. You will unleash organizational courage. What is this whole concept of a risk? A risk is any action with an uncertain outcome. Well, that's like pretty much everything, right? Yep, it is. When we do something challenging, in that moment we've done something critical. We've overcome something profoundly powerful. We've overcome our fear.
Jim McCormick is the founder and president of the Research Institute for Risk Intelligence. He's the author of 3 books on risk-taking and management, including The Power of Risk and Business Lessons from the Edge. Jim has an MBA and a degree in engineering. He's an experienced leader in both the private and public sector, as a corporate chief operating officer and serving in a presidential administration in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. Jim is an active, world-class skydiver with over 4,000 skydives and more than 66 hours of freefall. He's jumped from 31,000 feet, holds 6 skydiving world records, and was a member of a skydiving expedition to the North Pole. His clients include PepsiCo, Hewlett-Packard, Bank of America, FedEx, Unilever, Aflac, State Farm, Wells Fargo, GlaxoSmithKline, Accenture, Siemens, Verizon, the Clorox Company, the U.S. Army, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Jim McCormick on the intelligence of risk, unleashing organizational courage.
It was summertime. School was out. My best friend at age 11 was John Siegel. We were inseparable. We'd spent every day together adventuring and exploring. That morning I knocked on his door. John was excited. He wouldn't tell me why. He said, just follow me. So I followed John out into the garage, and there in the corner behind a couple of boxes were 4 6-inch wheels. Those wheels were our passport to adventure. What were we up to? We were building what we called a go-kart. It wouldn't have an engine. That wasn't necessary. It was just going to be powered by gravity, because with a couple of respectable hills nearby, that would be more than enough. As we got to the hill, our pace quickened. We had no intention of stopping until we got to the very top. And that's when it became apparent to me that John was smarter than me. John had taken the lead in designing and building the Eliminator, but for some reason he felt it was important that I be the first to ride it. Off I went. My guess is if there was a picture taken of my face at that moment, it would have been a combination of absolute elation and abject fear. But when we take on that challenge, when we take our bicycle and ride down that steep slope, when we go to the high dive and after having climbed down a few times before, actually jump off, when we jump out of an airplane, when we ask somebody to marry us, when we do something challenging, in that moment we've done something critical. We've overcome something profoundly powerful. We've overcome our fear. So you're thinking, okay, what is this whole concept of a risk? A risk is a very simple premise. A risk is any action with an uncertain outcome. Now think about that. Any action with an uncertain outcome. Well, that's like pretty much everything, right? Yep, it is. So that means you're probably taking risks all day long. Exactly right. You can't really discuss risk, as I mentioned before, without addressing our preconceived notions and also the way we've been conditioned to think about risk and the people who have done it badly, because risk regularly gets a bad name, and it always seems like the risk done poorly gets more attention than risk done well. Lehman Brothers, a Wall Street icon, 26,000 employees, in business for over 150 years. In 2008, Lehman Brothers declared the largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States. What went wrong? Lehman Brothers took massive risks unsuccessfully. Lehman Brothers' investment portfolio was so heavily leveraged that only a 4% negative swing in value could negate the entire multi-billion-dollar value of the portfolio. Consider that. Only a 4% loss in value and the net worth of that portfolio would be entirely gone. In addition, Lehman Brothers had some ethical issues. They were using accounting gimmicks to hide the true financial condition of the company. So what are the lessons we can gain from Lehman Brothers? Number one, do not take risks on a regular basis that can destroy an organization. Secondly, be honest. What is the first word that every child learns? No. Exactly. And why is it that the first word we learn is no? Because we get started very much risk inclined. The problem is we don't have something to balance it out, something that we only develop with time, something called judgment. The part of our brain that provides us with judgment and self-control is called the prefrontal cortex. And research shows it's not fully developed until we're in our mid-20s. Have you ever observed that when you go online to reserve a rental car, the system asks you if you're 25 years old. It doesn't ask you if you're 16 or you're 18 or you're 21. It wants to know if you're 25 or older. And if you're not, you may not be able to rent a car, and if you can, you may have to pay a premium. And why is that? Because until we get to that point in our lives, our brain system has not fully developed to where we're much less likely to have an accident. A well-established organization in a fairly static industry will likely not be taking many risks at all. They will have a hard time embracing the concept regardless of how calculated those risks are. Because we all know that organizations and individuals, given the opportunity, will pretty much avoid risk-taking. Some large banks I've worked with are classic examples of that kind of organization. On the other side, organizations in highly competitive industries that are seeking to gain market share have no choice but to be very risk inclined, or they're going to be eliminated. Research into the field of group socialization tells us that risk aversion and risk inclination tend to be reinforced. This means a group of individuals working together who are risk averse tend to become more risk averse. Similarly, a group of individuals who are risk inclined working together tend to become more risk inclined. Let's take an example of two hypothetical coworkers. They're working together on a project team. Let's call them Ryan and Andrea. Ryan and Andrea live in the suburbs with their spouses. They live in homes with 2 smoke detectors in each room, 4 CO2 detectors throughout the house. They're both proud owners of industrial quality home security systems, even though they live in relatively crime-free neighborhoods. Their children haven't been allowed outside on weekends between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. for fear that sun exposure may result in skin cancer. What are the implications of Ryan and Andrea working together, these 2 risk-averse individuals, over an extended period of time? After a year's time, Ryan has become so risk-averse, he's no longer willing to send a single email without running it by the legal department first. He's lost his entire effectiveness. On the other end of the spectrum, let's pick 2 other coworkers working together in a project team. Let's call them Tony and Shannon. Tony and Shannon are risk adventurers. They love rock climbing, they love mountain biking, and it turns out on their separate vacations to Fiji and the Caribbean, both enjoyed being lowered down into the ocean in shark cages. What is the impact of Shannon and Tony working together on a project team and reinforcing each other's risk inclination? They had to be reined in after a certain amount of time because they had retained an ad agency and 3 different graphic designers without any authorization or budget to pay them. Have you seen examples of this in your organization where people's individual risk dispositions are reinforced by the culture of the environment that they're working in? And see, here's the problem. Because we can't allow something as critical as the risk disposition of an organization to be developed by accident as opposed to by design. And that's where it's important to know to actively target the risk posture that is going to best serve your organization. As you may be aware, Google has a policy called 20% time. 20% of most Google employees have the opportunity, 20% of the time of most Google employees, they are allowed to dedicate to a project of their own choosing. Now think about this. That means the equivalent of 1 day per week of a 5-day work week, a Google employee can pursue whatever they desire. And there is absolutely no certainty that that has any strategic alignment with what the organization is trying to accomplish. So by any reasonable estimation, Google's taken a significant risk. But it works. It works for a variety of reasons. For one thing, it gives Google a tremendous advantage when it comes to recruiting. They want to recruit these tremendously talented individuals, and part of what they can offer them is the opportunity to pursue their creative passions on company time. When you target the risk posture that allow your organization to excel, give yourself and your team permission to risk, align incentives with the outcomes you're seeking, you will unleash organizational courage, and your own records will await you. Thank you very much.